Today on Locked On Canadiens, is the goaltending good enough for the playoffs? What would we want in a third line center? And let's talk about defense pairings we would like to see.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 1132. We want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day every day as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every day. We are free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. My name is Laura Saba, also known as The Active Stick, and I'm joined by the wonderful Ian Boisvert, also known as Maybe It's Ian. Ian, how are you doing on this kind of muggy Tuesday evening?
Yeah, it's the last official week of summer. So, which means we're, just that much closer to no more hot weather, which I cannot stand. And also to complaining about lineups and preseason games. We're so close. We're right there.
So close. We're so close. But first, we got to complain about lineups in the rookie showcase. Don't forget that. We will be doing that in about 2 weeks' time. And I will be doing that in person, actually, thanks to one of our listeners. And we'll have more on that later. But in the meantime, let's start talking about, this is another listener-generated topic segment or segment idea. And specifically, the question was whether Samuel Montembeault and Caden Primo are good enough to get the Habs into and through the playoffs. So we have a lot of opinions on goaltending on this show. And Ian, being new to the show, I think that's not new to you. I think you still have lots of strong goaltending opinions. And I kind of want to ask you first, let's kind of break it into two parts. Is this goaltending tandem good enough for the regular season? And then let's talk about the playoffs.
For the regular season, I think they're fine. I went through and dug out some numbers from last season. Obviously, some of those this is what I do, numbers guy. Of course, some of those numbers are skewed a little bit because of the 3 goalie monster that the Canadiens used for way too long last year, even though they said they were trying to not do that. Jake Allen was statistically probably the third best goalie on the Montreal Canadiens last year. And the fact that they managed to trade him at all is kind of astounding. The Canadiens last season had a team save percentage of .897. The league average was .898. So they were as league average as you can get. Allen brought that average down. He was an .892. Montembeault was a .903. Primo was a .910 with 2 shutouts. The only goalie with a shutout, which is, again, would not have guessed that. I do not remember that from that last season. It was wiped from my brain.
Very fun.
Does anything about those jump out to you? Like any of those numbers?
I think the biggest thing is I've continuously been amazed over the last couple of years about what the bar is for good goaltending now, or league average goaltending. I remember we used to look at a guy who had .915 and we're like, that's not good enough. And now .915 is stellar, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I think that's one of the things is that, the game is changing and the little tweaks that they've been making, making the pads a centimeter thinner or whatever it is, are really kind of working to increase goals scored. I think one of the big things that jumps out to me is obviously Caden Primo did not play very many games, but his statistics the year previous were probably quite abysmal at the NHL level, right? So obviously they didn't put him in as many difficult situations as they ordinarily would. They did run a lot with Jake Allen and Samuel Montembeault until Jake Allen got traded. Caden Primo got few starts. The starts were few and far between, but in almost every single one of them, he was able to step up and show us that there has been growth in his game year over year, particularly at the NHL level. I don't think anyone had any qualms about his play in the AHL level, and we'll get to that when we start talking about the playoffs. And the other thing, too, with Samuel Montembeault, too, is that for me, he was exactly what the Habs basically needed, right? There were a lot of games where the stat line didn't necessarily show just how much of an important factor he was in the game.
Yeah.
But I think if he's able to just keep pace with his this season, like, I guess, ability. I don't know. I don't want to say stats because there's going to be a lot of difference, right? With like the
Sure.
defensive lines changing and, probably the penalty kill, et cetera, changing and all of that. So for me, like, I think if he's able to keep pace with last year, Samuel Montembeault, like the Habs should be in a pretty good position in the regular season, because really with Kent Hughes making that trade, et cetera, not only is he rewarding the team for working hard, but he's also sending a message to them. And I don't think that message was, we need better goaltending.
Yeah, agreed. And you make a good point about regular season Montembeault. I looked up the Money Puck does a really great job of showing goals saved above expected for a goalie, which is essentially like how many goals did you stop that should have gone in the net. Of goalies to play at least 25 games, he ranks 14th at 5-on-5, 7.7 goals saved above average. So again, he's right in the middle, right? Like he is. If we talk all the time about teams who can score a lot. Well, if they just had league average goaltending, they'd be fine.
Right.
The Canadiens have league average goaltending. Like I cannot find a more average group if I tried.
Right.
The part of this that I think is most interesting is Caden Primo, in that I think next season we're either talking about him stealing the starting job or he's not playable. Like
Right.
those are the two. Caden Primo's numbers are pretty good because his highs are so high and his lows are so low that like he's somewhere in the middle.
He's
Right?
not league average goaltending. It
Right.
averages out eventually, but that's not what I would call his game.
Right. So like that's a story for me to watch next year, is like, okay, Primo, you're no longer in the 3 goalie system. You won. You're still here. What do you do with this opportunity? You're probably going to play. He played 23 games last year. He's probably going to play closer to 35, 40.
Right. Which is
What
what
does
you
he do with
want.
that?
Which is what
Yeah.
you want, especially if you're trying to float a 1A, 1B tandem, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
The playoffs are a different story, right? Like we haven't seen either of these goalies play playoff games in the NHL. Just hasn't happened. We haven't seen Caden Primo in the playoffs in Laval, and it was
and that was
awesome.
great.
Yeah, he was so good.
He basically stole like multiple series until
Yeah.
they ran into a juggernaut they couldn't stop.
Yeah, he was spectacular. And Montembeault, I'm not sure if he's ever played in the playoffs even in his AHL career. I don't think he has in the NHL because he was in some lean years in Florida and he wasn't the starter.
Exactly.
So what do you think about this? Like, let's say this team does make the playoffs. Is goaltending a concern going into it?
I think like team quality as a whole is a concern
Yeah.
going into it. I think it's going to be less dependent on like, oh no, a goalie just like starts to like forget how to play hockey like in that moment, which happens to so many goaltenders making the playoffs for the first time, especially if they have like a fantastic season, right? There are no, like, I didn't look up the stats on this, but there's always one guy. There's always one guy that costs the playoff series and like, it turns into a whole thing. I think it's really that if the Canadiens do make the playoffs, it'll be a wild card spot and they're going to be up against top competition. And as a whole, like that top competition that I'm expecting is like number 1, number 2 in the conference or the league. And so that to me is like they're going to be playing. It's going to be a David versus Goliath type situation. And it's not going to be only up to the goaltending. But again, you never know, right? Like they might get league average goaltending and then like other elements of this team might get lucky, like Josh Anderson might all of a sudden turn into like a scoring machine if he's still on this team. You never know, right? So, but I think like for me, like the prediction that I have is that goaltending is not going to be the thing that costs them in the playoffs. I still worry that it's going to be a little bit of a lack of a transition game, a collective defensive problem, and like not enough scoring to overcome those flaws. More scoring than they've had in the past. Yes, they've got like they've really shored that up, but I think ultimately goaltending is not going to cost them the playoffs.
Yeah, and this is why I don't necessarily agree with some of the people who, like, we were asked, I don't know if it was this last mailbag, it probably was, would we rather have a top 3 pick or make the playoffs this year? And most people, when we said top 3 pick, a lot of people said, no. Playoffs. It's like, well, what value is there in the Washington Capitals making the playoffs this last year?
Right.
There's none. They got smoked. Like it wasn't, yeah, they got 2 home playoff dates. I'm sure their owner loved that. But I don't think there's a ton of value in getting in just for the sake of getting in and getting your butt kicked. I really don't. Like, I don't, you can probably try to convince me on that, but I just don't think that's of value, especially when, like you said, goaltending isn't going to be the issue. It's a team structure concept that we haven't seen this team be good enough to get in the playoffs. Like
Right.
that needs to change before I'm like, yes, playoffs need to be the goal now.
Right. And I do think that there is some value to making the playoffs, right? Like people keep pointing out about the experience and stuff, but if you're going to get swept in 4 games, you're not really getting playoff experience.
Right.
Exactly like you said, you're getting an experience in getting your butt kicked. And so there has to be some sort of balance. So for me, like, if this year, and I'm not saying forever, I'm saying this year, top 3 pick would be preferable, but next year, if they don't make the playoffs next season, that's going to be a fail. Like that is going to be like serious questions are going to be asked in Montreal. There's going to be a lot of the navel gazing that we're used to here in the city. In the meantime, I did kind of want to talk about third line centers. It wasn't really that topical until I started thinking about who's going to be playing this season on this team. And I wanted to pose the question to my co-host and kind of talk about like what would we look for in a third line center. And that's coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. This episode is brought to you by Game Time, and let me tell you about Game Time. It makes finding tickets to any event so easy. It's a no-brainer. There is so much there. There's so many things about the app that I love. They have curated deals, and they make it so easy to find the best price on great seats to events you want to go to. There's like, you can see the view from your seat before you go. Like there's, they always have the lowest price guarantee. You can get last minute tickets. It's just so easy. And they have a feature called Game Time Picks that filter out the fluff, and they show you only the incredible deals on the great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of seats and tickets. And for me, really, the all-in pricing, like you have to toggle the feature, but the all-in pricing is like a game changer for me, because how often do you try to buy tickets and then they have hidden fees and you end up paying so much more than you expected? So the all-in pricing feature really prevents that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right. I know we have thanked you for making us your first listen of the day, but make your second listen of the day Locked On NHL. They have all the stories from all over the NHL. I've been on it twice in the last couple of weeks. The Habs just keep doing things. They need to stop doing things so that we can get a Sunday night off, Ian. They've got everything. They've got all kinds of hosts from all across the Locked On NHL network, and you definitely should check them out wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, just like us. Okay, so Ian, I had this idea. I have had hiring on the mind. I wonder why. I wanted to talk about a third line center position and what we would look for. Like, let's say we were trying to post a role, like a third line center wanted on an NHL team. And this is an NHL team. So a third line center wanted on a good NHL team, right? Like this is a team where we're expecting a good regular season performance and a playoff performance. Like not necessarily, we know for sure they're going to win the cup or anything like that, but they've got a chance. So What are the elements that you look for in a third line center? Let's say you're hiring.
I wrote down some things as if I was writing a job posting. Face-offs above 50% are like, that's to me the most important quality of a third line center, because essentially, like, if you're looking for a third line center, let's say you're buying for a playoff run, you're looking for somebody who you can put out on the ice and not worry about. It starts with winning a face-off, because then you have the puck. It's a novel concept. I think face-offs oftentimes are overblown. But if you have that one guy who can win 54, 55% of them, you're that much better than your opponent. Do faceoffs matter that much to you, or am I
no? Okay, so I'm kind of the same mind. Like I agree with you, because I do think that faceoffs are important, but it always depends on the context, right? Like you're not going to lose a game based on faceoffs. You're not going to win a game entirely based on faceoffs. Right. But there's certain situations where you do need to be good at them. And I think the third line center gets played in those situations most often, right? Like it's a defensive zone start, something like that, where there's a particular, or maybe it's a particular line matchup that you want. And so like you could lose chances on faceoffs. You could earn scoring chances or high danger shots or whatever off of faceoffs. And I don't think they're unimportant entirely, but I think it's not a make or break thing. But for a third line center, it's definitely like we're saying, who's our ideal candidate? They have to be able to win most or a high percentage of those faceoffs. So what was your next criteria?
In the same line as faceoffs, and this might seem kind of counterintuitive based on how value goes in the NHL, but for the Montreal Canadiens right now, I think they have to be left-handed. I think they have to be
Oh,
a left-hand shot because go down the center lineup. Nick Suzuki, right-hand shot. Kirby Dach, right-hand shot. Jake Evans, right-hand shot. So, like, if you're a third-line center on this team, you're being put out there in the third period in a defensive zone draw with Nick Suzuki so that, depending on what side of the ice it's on, one of you can take it.
right.
That may not seem like it's much to you and me or our listeners, but it matters a lot to coaches. They really want to have the guy out there who has the right-handedness to win the puck into the corner. So to me, that matters if we're trying to find the guy who's going to be the third line center on this team.
It's like you've got two equal candidates, except one's a right-hand shot. You're picking the right-hand shot.
The left-hand shot. I'm not taking the right-hand shot.
Sorry. Yes.
Every other team in the league, I feel like it would be the opposite. Your brain went to what the rest of the league would probably do. Like, right? So I think it's very weird, but that's the way that this Canadiens team is structured. Up front, at forward, they have a lot of right-handed shots, especially at the very top of their lineup.
Right.
What about you? What else is important to you?
So for me, I think an ability to think hockey, like hockey sense, which is such an abstract concept, and like I hate like things like that. But what I mean is, does the player have the hockey smarts to anticipate the next few plays? Because like it or not, that third line center has to be a two-way center. There are defensive situations they are going to be put in. Very often they're on the penalty kill, and sometimes they're on both special teams, right? And I think for me, like that, it's not just necessarily spatial awareness, but it's an ability to know what the right decision is. And so for me, like I think that's very strong. And then another thing that's really, really important to me is that it has to be hard for you to separate them from the puck. And a lot of times people confuse size for that. Yes, a lot of times it does help you if you're a bigger guy, but there are tiny players in this league that are extremely hard to separate from the puck. But you have to be above average in that sense because of all the situations you're going to be used in. Yes, it's the third line. You look sometimes at the shift charts after, and they play so many fewer shifts. But if you look at the quality or the situations of those shifts, I think it's just so important that the person just be smart with the puck. Like he sees he sees the ice very well, where he has great hockey sense, just things like that, where you are good at decision making on the ice.
Yeah, completely agreed. The crux of that argument was that they're going to play not a lot, but they're going to play really, really important minutes, right?
Yes,
Especially in the playoffs, they're a line matching line.
Yeah.
So you need them to be able to have the puck so that the, Matthews that you're going up against doesn't have it, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's really well said. The last point I'll make is every job description should have a salary on it, and if it doesn't, should be concerned. I think that your third line center has to come in around 3.5-4 million or somewhere under that. I don't know if that's off base with the cap expanding almost exponentially now, but I feel
not at all.
They can't break the bank.
Yeah, I think like 15 years ago, we would be saying 1.5 to 2, right? It's not 15 years ago.
Right.
And so when somebody hears like third or fourth, like 3 or 4 million, they're like, oh, that's a lot, because it's in context if we're used to like, the price in 2003 or whatever. Right. Like I went way further than 15. I swear I know how to count. I know addition and subtraction, everybody. I do. But yeah, no, I think the salary is really, really important. And I think that you can't, like your energy people should be on the fourth line. So this is kind of a thing where it's like this is not even a nice to have. It's not a must have. It's not a nice to have. It's really just a thing where if you're that, then you belong on a different line because you need to, all the other things are way more important. And like any hockey player, like I don't think that in today's NHL, and I'm sorry to say this because there's so many players that are still like that, and there's so many prospects even that have system that like have issues, but you need to be an above average skater no matter what. Like you need to
Yep.
be able to skate very well because whatever other skills you have, whether it's your hands or your smarts or your speed, well, speed and bad skating often. Like I think that you have to be a very strong skater no matter what because you have to be able to keep up with your top two lines.
Yeah, agreed. And that doesn't even necessarily mean you have to be a burner, like the fastest guy on the ice.
Right.
But, you have to be able to keep up. You have to be able
Exactly.
to have a smooth skating stride, like good acceleration so that you can keep up with guys. You're skating so much as a centerman. Centerman and defensemen skate more than anybody else. So like those guys need to be really, really strong skaters.
Right. And so that's our job ad. That's how we're hiring. So apply within, inquire within, everybody. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about defense pairs because it's a conversation that's been going on a lot, particularly because some people want to trade Mike Matheson, which I don't know if I agree or disagree, but we don't know if it's going to happen. But let's talk about that in just one moment. All right. So defense pairings. This is not a mailbag question or a listener generated topic. This time it was just, I've been, trolling all kinds of Habs social media and Habs related social media. Never read the comments, but do because sometimes there's interesting topic ideas that come out of them. And a lot of people would now with Jordan Harris gone, and we talked a couple weeks ago or a week ago. It hasn't been that long since the Line A trade. I think it's just been a week.
A week, yeah.
A week and a day. With Jordan Harris gone, people were talking about like an opportunity for some other guys, et cetera, et cetera. So I think for me, like one thing that I did want to talk about, because I still think that on this team right now, they have top two defenseman potential players. And they have a lot of potential there. I have, you've got kind of like an abundance, but I still don't see a number one defenseman on this team. And when I say number one defenseman, we know that Caden Gooley's probably going to play there by default, or Mike Matheson's going to be playing there by default, depending on the situation and the day. I just don't see it. I don't see a guy that's going to do that. And I'm wondering, Ian, if I'm way off base or if you have any thoughts on that.
I think that there are some guys who can play the role well. Like you mentioned Mike Matheson, you mentioned Caden Gooley. But I think what you're looking for and what I'm kind of looking for is like a Victor Hedman type.
Yeah.
And to your point, I don't think there is that guy right now.
In
Could
the
Reinbacher
system,
become that
available.
guy? Maybe. It's not likely,
Yeah.
but maybe. But you're right. I don't think that they have that prototypical, 35-minute a night defenseman, guy who plays in the playoffs and everybody is horrified of.
Yes.
They had Shea Weber for a while, but they were using him in that role, I think, way past when he should have been used in that role. And then they also ruined it by playing him with Ben Sherratt. So,
yeah. Also for too many minutes.
Yeah, like he played 2 games every 1 game. Like it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I agree. Like, and that's what I think makes this year's defense so interesting is it's kind of an open audition for that spot, right? Like there's a lot of guys who potentially could see themselves in that role. It's just a matter of who goes and takes it.
I think, and that's the thing is that like all those guys, right? Like there's an opportunity for them and there's a motivation for them, right? Like there's built-in motivation because it's anyone's game right now, or technically, theoretically, right? It's anyone's game. Like my concern really is who do you play with who to get them? Like let's say Logan Mailloux gets called up to the NHL. Who are you playing with him with? Like what line are you putting him, or what pairing are you putting him on, and who are you playing him alongside?
I'm so glad you asked me because I was on the top 25 under 25 for Habs Eyes on the Prize. I did the Logan Mailloux episode with Patrick Bexell, and I love the idea of playing Logan Mailloux with Jaden Struble. I think that is a perfect third pairing defense because we've seen it from Struble. He can play really strong defense. That's the aspect of Logan Mailloux's game that needs work. He needs to learn how to play in his defensive zone a little bit more. The offensive raw talent that Mayu has that's not going anywhere. Like, we know that's there. We know it's that he had a great offensive season, rookie season in Laval. He needs somebody who's going to cover up his defensive deficiencies. And I think Strubal's the perfect guy to do that. I
He's
don't
really
know.
good at decision making, which is Logan Mayu's weak spot.
Right. And again, it all depends on how Mayu looks in camp. If he doesn't look ready, they're not going to bring him up. They're going to keep him in Laval. So if he makes the team, that's a pairing I really would like to see.
Okay, so let's talk about David Reinbacher now, because both you and I are on the record as wanting him to play in the AHL the entire year.
Yeah.
Just be the guy, be that guy in the AHL. So one of the things that when I talked to Sebastian High about him, Locked On NHL Prospects, it's available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. When I spoke to Sebastian, he's not creative, right? He doesn't generate. He's steady. He's good at defense. He's reliable, et cetera, et cetera. So who would you play him with if the Habs go against our advice and bring him up and let him make the team this year?
If we're looking for that sort of complementary player, Mike Matheson is the guy that I would think about. But I love Mike Matheson as the little agent of chaos that he is. I feel like there is not a player I want with David Reinbacher less than Mike Matheson. And I love Mike Matheson dearly. He's going to leave that kid out to dry so much if they play together this year. So and this is why, I'm so against playing Reinbacher in the NHL this year, because there isn't really a great fit for him as far as like a guy who can play on the left side, who's going to cover for him or push the play offensively. Maybe Caden Gooley, but like Caden Gooley has shown that he has a little bit of a lower ceiling offensively than we thought he did.
Right.
I don't know. Like, am I off base there? Like, I think that the concept of Matheson just rushing up the ice and leaving Reinbacher back to play like 18 3-on-1s a period is just not something I want to see.
It's not, but it would be hilarious, right? It'd still be funny. Yeah. It would be what I call exciting sometimes when there's like, for lack of a better word. But I do think so. We also always had Hudson penciled in alongside Reinbacher. I don't think that they're both making the team this year. I think it's one or the other. I obviously think it's going to be Lane Hudson more than anything else. So who do they put Lane Hudson with in that scenario?
I think he played with him in the 2 games that we saw towards the end of the season. It's David Savard. Right. Like, I liked what that pairing did. He's a guy like Savard is a guy who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Like he's a guy that you want to play a rookie with. Mm-hmm. I think that that's a perfect pairing. And it's a stay at home defenseman who's going to let Lane do Lane things and just fly up the ice and make plays offensively and not have to worry so much about, what's going on in his own zone. So, it's to me, that's the easiest play with Lane Hudson, but I don't know. Do you see it that way as well?
I think that's what's going to end up happening because there's no other fit. There's no other fit for that, right? Like, you don't want to play like Lane Hudson way too far down the depth chart. Sorry. So you kind of have to pair him with somebody like a Savard. And Savard, there's something about him that I just adore. Like, I know, he's not going to be on this team for much longer. I know he's not going to be on this team when the contending window's open. There's just something about him that I adore. And like, I don't know what it is. And I just feel like him being around these rookies is good, right? It's good for the team. It's good for their future. It's good for them. Any parting thoughts on defensemen before I have a call to action for our listeners, Ian?
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to add was just, I think that a Gooley-Barron pairing makes too much sense because I think that this is going to be the last call for Justin Barron.
Yeah.
It seems like he's run out of racetrack a little bit. And if he can't make it work with one of the team's best left-handed defensemen, it's probably it, right? Like, that's sort of, I feel bad because like he seems like a great kid. He's taken a lot of bad hits the last few years, but it really feels like we're at the end of the rope here.
I think it's really telling that in my penciling in, I did not include him.
See, there's too many guys back there. He gets lost in the shuffle.
Exactly. And so he really needs to carve a name for himself in this lineup if he's going to make it. And it's not like, again, nothing against him. Like you said, he's a good kid. He's had a rough couple years. I find that he hasn't done anything to keep his name at the forefront of all of our minds. And it's possible that if that's the case, then it's also the case with management and coaching as well. But yes. All right. So before we let you go, listeners, I'm getting my car, my new car. I don't know if everyone is aware of this scenario. I had to get a new car. Terrible time to get one, but I'm very excited about it. I'm getting a Subaru, and I want the listeners to help us name it something Habs themed. So far, the front runner is Saku the Subaru. If you guys can do better than that, please send it to us, lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. Leave it in the YouTube comments. Send it to us on Twitter. You can also find us on Instagram now, Locked On Canadiens. You can DM us on Instagram or leave it on the comments or whatever you want. Help name my car, but also please send us mailbag questions because our next episode is our Friday mailbag. We are very, very excited about it. We love doing mailbags for you guys. So make sure, again, I'll read that again. I'll list those again. LockedOnCanadiens@gmail.com. Our Instagram is Locked On Canadiens. Our Twitter is LO_Canadiens. You can leave them in the YouTube comments. You can find my co-host on Twitter at Maybe It's Ian. You'll find me at The Active Stick. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Friday. We'll talk to you on Friday, not tomorrow.